All right, and it looks like we are live from the message in the chat. And so I believe right now we have 16 folks present, so we can go ahead and get started with today's meeting. Welcome everybody to our December meeting of the Virginia Advisory Committee for the Education of the Gifted. We're meeting virtually once again, and we've got tasks before us, and so we've got an agenda that was sent out ahead of time, a draft agenda, and so I'd like you to look over the draft agenda, and I'll entertain a motion to approve it for our work today.
I believe we have a change. Melanie, how should it read?
We ended up not doing a Gantt chart. We're working on just kind of a working document right now, outline. Gantt chart, I think, would require a larger project, and this one is a little more scaled down.
So we'll just, it should read, instead of Gantt chart at 1040, it will just be a planning outline.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
I'll entertain a motion. Oh yeah. Yeah, any other changes to the agenda?
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All right. Let's see, I guess. Can we just type in the chat? All in favor, just type yes. All right, so we have an agenda for today. So according to our agenda, the next thing on it is the Department of Education report by Dr. Donna Poland.
Okay, so first thing on the list is AYGS directors, and they are meeting today with Secretary Carney to, I guess, discuss some issues surrounding diversity in governor schools. I'm not exactly sure what the agenda is, but they'll be meeting on that. And we haven't had a directors meeting in a while, so it's just pretty much, you know, they're just trying to manage their programs in light of the whole COVID issue. Technical reviews for local plans, that's gone a little bit different this year, but so far I've been receiving, I probably have back about half of the technical reviews that I sent out this year, which this year was a big year in terms of the number of reviews that had to be done. I think it was somewhere around 45 overall, 45, yeah. And so I've gotten about half of them back. So they were done virtually, people volunteered. We grouped them in groups of 3 and from different school divisions. And then I sent out all the information to each group and gave them till mid-December to have the technical reviews done, and they could do it at their own schedule. I can't imagine how it was. I tried to put more experienced people, one person at least on each team, because I felt like I'm not there to answer questions or to help direct the team. And I certainly couldn't participate in 45 reviews. So I'm hoping it went well, but I will be reviewing all the documents, and I've gotten positive feedback that they had a good time, and the discussion was productive, and that's part of the whole technical review process, is an opportunity for them to gain knowledge and share knowledge. And so hopefully, everything works out all right. And it might be, I still say there's benefit on face-to-face with discussion and me helping to guide the group. And plus it's all done on one day, half of it's done on one day. So anyway, it is a little bit more costly and a little more time away from work, but I think, hopefully we'll go back to in-person technical reviews. The regulations are kind of still where they were in October with some sign-offs. And I went to the website, and you really can't see anything on the town hall that's any different. And then Emily, our clerk of the board, sent me a web address late yesterday, and I'll send that out to y'all after the meeting. But basically it's just saying that we're still kind of at the next level of sign-offs from the board, and we haven't made any progress. So I'm still thinking that this is going to take some time. Like I thought initially, it would take probably a year to get through all the sign-offs. But as soon as I can see things are moving, which might be more after the first of the year, then we'll talk about when the 60-day comment period might be. Might have a better handle once things are starting to move. So it kind of brings us to VAG, and I'm going to let somebody from VAG, either Torn or Sarah, update us on what's happening there.
So VA Gifted did have, last time we met, we were getting ready to have our virtual conference on October 10th. And so we had our conference on October 10th. It went really well. Our speaker was Dr. Yvette Jackson. Our numbers, because it was, was Saturday and everything was going on. I mean, people joined, but a lot of people did not attend. I think they're waiting on to do the asynchronous component. That's pretty much everything that happened for the October 10th virtual seminar. So went really well though. Went really well.
Good. One thing I'll just kind of update you on quickly, since I was kind of involved with it. I serve as a chairperson for the state directors of gifted programs. So we're a small group. And, with only 50 states, and DC could join if they want. We had a conference in November, the early part of November, and it went for 4 days, but we only met for basically 3 hours every day. And we had guest speakers, and our focus was on diversity and action plan and understanding belief systems, which was really informative. So it was a very good conference. We had 35 people attend, representing 30 states. And I think it was very, very productive. And we're looking at doing a lot. We've had that's the most we have ever had is 30 states represented. We've never had, nor have we ever had 35 members. So it was a very productive conference, and we're looking forward to doing some things together as a group, virtually, of course, over the start of the year here. And hopefully we'll be able to meet. Typically we meet at NAGC on a few days prior to NAGC starting. So hopefully we'll get to meet in person this year, but we're also looking at piping people in who aren't able to attend. We were finally able to meet our colleague from Hawaii. So that was great. But she never gets to come back to the States for conferences and stuff. So it was great that she was on board this time. And also our group worked hand in hand with NAGC on the State of the States report, which is a survey that's done to all state directors of gifted programs, and then the information is compiled into a report. And we had, even though the report's coming out this year, we had to go back to the information of 2018-19, because when we collected the data in the start of COVID this year, that's the most current data that was accessible. So the report always comes out, kind of behind the data, which is unfortunate, but it seems like that's just the only way we can do it. But anyway, the University of North Texas was contracted to help assist with this report. And this is the first time we've had all 50 states in the and DC represented in terms of responses to the survey. So it's supposed to be released by NAGC this, maybe next week, maybe around the 15th of December or something like that. It'll be released. And it's not, it doesn't make assumptions and it doesn't make total conclusions. It's pretty much kind of restates, summarizes some of the data, but the large portion of the report is the data, just the raw data. And, universities and researchers, doctoral students use this information. And of course, at some level, it's already 2 years old, the information is, but that's all we had to work with. So, and I foresee that it's gone very well, and I foresee that we will actually do some more. This will happen again in the near future. I don't know if we'll do it every year, but every other year, maybe something like that. Also alongside with it will be for every area that the NAGC kind of focuses on the see me, challenge me, teach me, understand me, there'll be a flyer that comes out that kind of dovetails with the report and just gives some basic information and then some links to additional information that you can find. But we've already determined that we're going to work with NAGC to release some other flyers that really speak to the information or the things that states are doing to help support each one of those areas, the see me, teach me, understand me, challenge me. And so while the 4 flyers will probably come out at the same time the report comes out here in December, the additional flyers are something that we'll collaborate on here in the next near future after the first of the year. So I think it'll really highlight some of the things that are happening in other states with respect to those 4 areas. And then, which will be great in terms of sharing with the public things that states are doing. Because oftentimes I don't think they see what's happening from a statewide perspective. Any questions on any of that?
I have a quick question. So
Sure.
The name of the you're the chairperson of what's the name of the group again? I'm sorry.
The acronym is CSDPG, and it's
Okay.
for the Council of State Directors of Programs for the Gifted. And we do have a website. You can go to www.csdpg.org.
Okay, thank you.
Doesn't have tons of stuff up there, but of course, once they release the report, we'll link some things up there, and I kind of need to modify the agenda that was up there from our meeting because we did things a little bit differently at the last minute, but being a webmaster is a new experience for me. I've learned a lot. So anyway, any other questions? Okay. Turn it back to you, George, and we're a little bit ahead of schedule.
All right. So the next item on our agenda is the annual report and like the data strategic planning. This was, we have a planning document and outline, and it was noted that Melanie, Sarah, and Cheryl will be leading us through this component of today's meeting. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right.
Good morning, all. So briefly, I'm going to explain our process and how we got to where we are today, and just so that everyone can understand how we were doing it. The first step we took was to look at kind of our current state. And do I have the capability to share my screen? Yes, I do. All right, excellent. So I'm going to share with you all a graphic organizer that's empty. I'm not going to show the full one because it's a bit overwhelming. And what we ended up doing was just kind of doing a brainstorm around this particular graphic organizer, using the application called Lucidchart, which a lot of school districts have access to. And you basically, the way it works is you work through a process, and the purpose of this organizer is to think about how to sustain change for a long-term implementation. But the most important part are the guiding questions on the top, which are where are we now? Where do we want to go? And how will we get there? How will we know we are getting there? How, and then back to the how will we get there, and then how will we sustain focus? And between the three of us, Cheryl, Sarah, and I, we kind of did a bit of a brain dump of all the different questions and ideas. And so for something of this size, you could see it could be a bit overwhelming. So I won't share with you on that. We just reduced it down to going back to the beginning stages where we are. Where are we now? And that's our first step. So today, we're just going to focus on this particular outline. Can you all see that on the shared document? Okay. Where we're looking at the first question, where are we now? And under that is, so the original purpose of this was how do we best represent the data on our current website for division directors and division implementation so that it aligns with the regulations. The current state is that the data is listed in a table form with whole numbers, identifying the different categorical groups that are recognized by the state based on ethnicity, socioeconomic, linguistic diversity, and some other categories. With the regulations having a more equity focus, Donna kind of mentioned that it would be better for us to represent the data so that it can be useful for divisions to consider how to move forward so that students are having access and opportunities across their different divisions. So the questions that we're going to think about today, and you can, Donna sent the data that informs this, are what data do we currently have? And that is through the MSC data. And so that we're not creating trying to create new data. We're just working off of what we currently have. What data is required to meet the needs of the regulations? And then where on this regulation specifically do they align? And and then we'll move forward to thinking about who needs to be engaged in this process, and who might be some potential focus groups. And then the next steps will continue on forward to those other questions we mentioned. So before we start kind of diving in, because today we're going to really just like take some time and look as a group through the MSC data, which Donna had sent earlier, as well as a current copy of the regulations. Does anyone have any questions?
I kind of just, for people who might be listening on YouTube, our focus for doing this is to look at the annual report that is currently required as part of code and a state code. And so we're trying to think of how can we better inform the public about issues with gifted education in that annual report other than just raw numbers. And then at the same time, make available to divisions through the SSWS portal additional data, or it may be part of the annual report, but provide to them additional information that might be necessary to serve them in terms of determining, progress and changes and how their gifted programs are operating. Because basically 60% of the state gifted coordinators are not trained in gifted education. And so it is important that both the annual report that goes out to the community, to the local school boards, and provides information that they're able to use to help better structure their gifted programs. And then at the same time, would be helpful at the state level to have a clearer picture of what is happening across the state, so that you can see across the state in terms of numbers of gifted students and where they're identified and those kinds of things. And right now you can see that, but it's raw numbers, so it's not really helpful to understand, are we doing a good job? Or are we not doing a good job of identifying a variety of students? Or it's just basically a raw number that says we have this many kids identified, and there's no way to tell if we're doing a good job or not.
And
so anyway, sorry.
No, that's
we'll
really
go back.
Well,
back to.
We were talking about last time we met, Donna had shared a model from another state, how they were representing some of their data regarding identification and opportunities offered, and how was there an overlap between the students who were identified and who were had access to the opportunities and their categorical labels. So an example would be around of the state, how many students are identified who are Black students, and how many of those students, what percentage of those students who are identified as gifted taking advanced placement courses. And so it's when you're addressing issues of historically underrepresented populations, it's one thing just to increase numbers, but it's another thing to really address and be deliberate about making sure students have access to the opportunities and that there are strategies to accomplish that. But we cannot do that unless we know what the actual numbers are. So today our goal is to specifically talk about what data do we currently have that we could communicate and mine to share this information, and then within the regulations, what would help district directors, board members, and so on and so forth, create movement to implement change. And I think that's kind of where we are now. So why don't we, so I know Sarah and Cheryl are going to be helping take notes. And Sarah or Cheryl, do you all want to add some more thoughts before we dive in?
Yeah, I just had a quick question about the document that we were sent as an attachment because it listed the MSC data, but it shows that this report is really focused on the instructional personnel and licensure. So that made me wonder if there were another document that really aligned more to the data collected for students.
Oh,
Yeah, that is a good question.
yeah. I started seeing stuff about personnel, and then I thought, well, I guess I just, picked a page that was about personnel.
Right.
And so let me look here and go back to the website. Maybe right now you could talk about, or you could brainstorm, people take a few minutes and look through the regulations. And I think you were looking for like specific page and maybe the paragraph on that page where it calls out, this is something that divisions have to be mindful of, or it's required as part of being in their local plan. So maybe you can do that.
I did find two interesting data points that look like they're already collected even in this booklet, because it does record the number of people who are classified as teaching or working with gifted students. And so certainly that is a part of that quality profile, and that, or the SOQs, and that you have gifted personnel that match your enrollment. So I wondered if that didn't need to be a part of the reported data each year to show that the school division was indeed funding and providing FTEs for gifted services.
I think that's very important. There was a report that came out of Purdue University about a year ago where they gathered that data as well. So I think that that's relevant to making sure that folks who are working with students who are identified as gifted have an understanding of the students' needs.
And it's already collected, so.
Exactly.
Okay, good.
I would like to add, it would be helpful as we go through this for the committee members who make a comment, you might want to reference your role in your division, and that'll help us start to collect information about stakeholders, because you do represent part of the stakeholder group. So I'm kind of behind the scenes working on a Google Sheet collecting that information. So if you could provide that preface, I'd appreciate it.
And so Cheryl, I'm speaking as a gifted coordinator for a school division.
Thank you.
Okay, so I did find the document. So it's called the Student Record Collection, specifications for completing the student record collection, and I'll send that out to you.
Would it help continuing to share my screen, or would you all like to have something else up on the screen? And can everyone see it? I tried to make it as large as possible.
I like having it on the screen to help focus.
Okay.
Yes, I do too.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I concur. It makes it easier to keep it on one than try to have multiple things open.
Also, going back to Sarah's comment, can you, when you find something in the record, like you said, you found the teacher component, can you reference like what page it's on and what the item is called so that we can locate it better in the future? Because we'll need to know that.
Are you talking about in the regulations or in the guide?
In the guide, what,
Okay.
like I see on page 33, there was defined class type, and it gives you in this section is a general education class in this field may be left blank. So, but one of the codes is gifted education as part of how to code the teacher. But you had some specifics that you saw. So if you could tell us what page it was on and what the title of that.
I was looking at page 33 where it specifically called out the code for people who were in the teacher role of gifted education.
Okay, all right. So that may, because well, it has to be filled in somehow, or not filled in, but if it's left blank, then it refers to just general education class. And if it isn't a general education class, then they could complete it as gifted education. But it may be that if they're just differentiating in the classroom, they may leave that teacher as general education and not indicate that she is teaching gifted students.
Right, and I'll tell you what caught my eye in the middle of that page is that the statement that reads, "This element is necessary to determine if the teacher listed is properly endorsed for the services and content delivered." So that just kind of caught my eye.
Yeah, I can see where they, I don't know, may
So
not.
another way that you could find specific language is just by doing a search within the text using the Word document. So that might help navigate it a little. These are pretty robust documents.
Yeah.
And then earlier on page 32, it looked like it actually distinguished the format or maybe how the teacher worked with students, because there were two options, a number 3 and a number 4, and both gifted was, listed was an example in both categories.
And that's still in the MSC document about the personnel?
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. It's called teacher roll code. And the first one we talked about on page 33 is called defined class type.
I know, and I'm speaking, this is Dr. Felicia Lohman Sykes from Washington County, and I'm speaking as a division gifted coordinator. I know with those divisions that are using PowerSchool, when you are setting up courses, if you have students, for instance, in our division, we do not offer a specific gifted class. We don't have any type of course that has credit weight to it. But we have building level gifted coordinators, and we have set up a collaboration schedule within PowerSchool so that those building coordinators can have access to their list of gifted students within their building. They can see their schedule, they can see their demographic information. But when we set those courses up at the division level, there are things that we have to toggle in PowerSchool so that they are either included or not included in the master schedule collection. So when we're looking at whether or not a teacher is, whether they hold that endorsement in gifted education or they don't, we might, from the division level, need to look at how we're setting up our courses in PowerSchool, because the division report for each division, that master schedule collection, is pulled directly from PowerSchool. So we may need to have some guidance for divisions And for whoever does their student information system data entry, there may need to be some guidelines there for how we enter gifted courses into the system, whether or not they're toggled for master schedule collection. And if you do have that, say we do have a gifted education collaboration class, there's also a place where you can toggle it specifically for gifted and talented or not. So in trying not to be too confusing here, I would recommend that someone provide some type of guidance to divisions for how that data should be set up to begin with, so that it's pulled in those, either the student record or the master schedule collection, so that it's pulled properly.
Thank you. That's a really good point. And that's the kinds of things that's going to help the division make this work.
And if anyone needs any support or input, I've had this experience at the division level with setting up courses and with working in Power School. I've done this for several years, so I'm willing to offer any type of knowledge or background I have in helping in this area.
And this might be a kind of a separate document. I can see like us making suggestions and input as to how the annual report should look, but also providing a guidance document that goes along with that annual report that says, this is how you understand the information, and this is how you program your Power School or whatever program so that it meets the requirements of the master schedule, but also this report. So we are going to have to do those kinds of things too.
And Dr. Poland, I think if we don't have that type of document, I hate to say this, but I believe that divisions would have some mistakes and some errors in how they coded certain things, be it student records or teacher records or course records. I think that we need to have a definitive plan of how things are set up so that when they do that record collection, it comes out in the way that we need to gather the data that's important.
I agree.
Thank you, Felicia. I have noted in the back end Google Sheet that you're going to be one of our go-to people for that. So there is a column, and you are now added to that column.
All right, thank you.
In our brainstorming document, these questions definitely bubbled up. There was a lot of like, well, who would do that? And how do we know how to do that? So it's helpful to have that reiterated to know that we were on the right track.
And it varies from division to division. Some may do it at the school level, and you may have some type of student info specialist at a school. You may have someone at a division office. You might have someone who's assigned to a particular attendance zone. So these look different in each division, who actually does that data entry and the person responsible for coding and doing the scheduling setup. So we may need to look at providing some directions geared toward a couple of different avenues, I guess you could say, depending on who's responsible. It's going to look different based on the size of your division, just a lot of different factors there.
Well, then that points to us possibly targeting this as a focus group. If it's going to be an important enough data collection, a focus group, and then possibly coming up what are the modifications as you mentioned. And then long term, it may even give us an idea that would help divisions in their planning and reorganizing how they capture that information. It may end up having a checklist. Are you able to handle this part? How can you streamline?
I agree.
And then certainly going along that line also, this is Laura Kelly, Roanoke City gifted supervisor. With we use Synergy. So making sure that we're using all the different types of SIS systems that will, speak to each other for that data collection.
I have sent out the student record collection information. But I think maybe if we start with the regulations, looking at the proposed regulations and going through there to find out specifically what has to be addressed as part of these regulations, I think that would help focus us then on what data we need in order to address that. And then we could, if we have time, look at what additional data would be helpful that may not be part of the annual report, but may be part of something that is available through SSWS, if we want to take that on right now.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in. I don't know if this is the proper place and all of that to do it. This is George Full, Gifted Coordinator in Chesterfield. One of the things that with the new report, with the old report, is it doesn't tell you who you newly identified. It tells you like your referrals, and it tells you your identified kids in your division. And so I think when we're looking for data, as Donna was mentioning, if like identification goals, like looking at a comparison of new referrals and identification results. That way, if changes are made in a system, that can be easily tracked for a division, that they can say like, hey, we changed our identification processes last year. And the state report would be able to give the school board something very easy to interpret, the potential, especially if after several years, just, something to think about. That newly identified gifted students number does play a role when you're looking at that, if you're looking to change some things up.
Is that required in the regulations?
There is something in the regulations I remember reading about. Let me look real quick. I just shut it. I'll find it and get back.
Want to be able to do page and paragraph, because when we look at saying, here's our annual report, we want to make sure that all the requirements that the regulations say divisions need to look at or address or be mindful of, there's that information is provided through the annual report. So not that this isn't a bad thing, I'm just trying to make sure that when we come up with ideas or we work our way through the proposed regulations, that we're capturing everything that school divisions need to do as a result of the regulations.
So Dr. Poland, is it not in the screen and referral identification and service section? I'm looking under section D, number 1, because if that identification of students, I agree with what George is saying. If it's an annual report, we should be showing annual results, the change over time.
Are you referring to page 6?
My printout shows it on 7. It's number 1, just with the identification of students.
Okay.
In recording for the student record collection, you are either reporting the gifted referral flag or the gifted code. Ideally, those referral flags should be cleared by whoever is responsible for that in your IT department after the report has been submitted for the prior year. So your referrals should reflect just that current school year when it pulls the gifted code, so that you can see if they are identified, who's identified, how many, general, intellectual, specific academic. performing arts or career and technical, that pulls the entire population.
Right.
It may be that we would need to work with whoever designs these student information systems in Pearson with PowerSchool. I don't know about the others, but there is possibly a way to filter how we grab those gifted codes. So instead of grabbing the entire division, it may be that you are grabbing not only that, but those who were coded as gifted within a certain span of dates.
Yeah. And,
So that you
and I
could
think
see,
our IM, I mean, once we determine these are the things we need, then it's going to be up to myself and maybe, you know, a subcommittee of your group to sit down with the EIM people and say, you know, this is what we want. Can we get this by the way we collect the data currently? And so we'll figure, I think right now we need to go through and figure out what it is we would like to see. And then it's going to be a matter of saying, you know, or what, not necessarily what we'd like to see, but what is required as part of the proposed regulations. And then we can go back to the data to see, are there things in the data that already line up with this, like, you know, coding kids who take AP courses, that kind of thing. And then work with the EIM people to determine if they can pull that from the data. I think they can. I think they can write a code that will just say, look at people who are identified the prior year and or weren't identified the prior year and are this year. And then they can pull those kids. And so hopefully they got coded as referred, and then the system would be able to read that they were not identified the prior year, but they are this year, and they would pull them as identified this year within this time frame.
this leads into another quick question I have. Currently, on the annual report for gifted and on the proposed regulations, we address underserved populations and those subgroups. Mm-hmm. On our gifted annual report, if that population subgroup is particularly small, those numbers do not show up.
That's correct.
So are we able going forward, if in the regs we're looking at providing equitable identification and equitable service for under-identified and underserved students, are we able to make our reports visible, not visible, but can we make those subgroups visible if in a division it's a small percentage of the population?
I have some thoughts on that. And I had mentioned at our previous meeting when we were talking about representation indexes, since the divisions across Virginia are all so different. We cannot expect who's being identified and who is in the division to all be the same. We're not going to have alignment in that regard. But when you think about a representation index, it's important to talk about who is in the division first, and then within those groups, who is being identified, and if, you know, and what does that mean using a equity index as recommended by Donna Ford and other researchers. So that's some of the data that may not upon first glance be around gifted services, but by representing who's in the division first could be very valuable for school leaders and school boards to be able to say, okay, this is where we are, this is where we want to be, and how are we going to go about doing it?
I agree with you.
Sorry, this
agree.
is something that we already do within our division. I do that report myself. Who's in our division? Who are we referring, and who are we identifying? So it might be something that we want to look at making standard practice across the board for all divisions.
I agree with
So-
Melanie. She was suggesting to make sure that that you don't do apples to oranges, that you do have to preface the report because there is a varied, there's some school divisions that have 200 in them, and you can't expect somebody to have 200 to have the same student population or representation index as somebody like Fairfax who has 188,000. So you gotta provide context for people when they see it, because what looks proportionate may not, without the context, won't look the same. It won't be perceived the same. So it's really important to have the data from the divisions available so that people can be able to assess it appropriately.
That's one point. The other point that you raised, kind of first off, is that you cannot show low numbers, but we are going to be looking more at showing percentages, and especially as it relates to with that equity index. And so that might be part of the programming that has to be done on our end, is to program in that equity index configuration into providing percentages so you can see that. And
That would be extremely helpful.
right. And then the other issue is, still, if somehow numbers are extremely low, that it doesn't work, then it will still show, that the percentage is below 1 or below 2 or whatever we can have to deal with. I have to see how all that works out mathematically to be able to give you a clearer picture. But I'm saying that we can't show raw numbers less than
Agreed.
10.
Agreed.
That's a state regulation requirement. But we can show percentages. And I think a lot of what our report will do, the new annual report, will show percentages and not necessarily raw numbers. And so part of working with the EIM people to make sure that the percentages reflect what we want it to reflect. And the guidance document can explain more about how to use those percentages or how they were calculated, that kind of thing. It's going to be a big task. It's not going to be one of these, we're just going to pick this out of the data, collected data, and everything's going to be show a picture. But it's like Felicia said, she's calculating stuff on her own. But when you're talking about 60% of the people not having a background in gifted, they are not calculating this on their own, and they are not fully understanding the whole component of equitable access and especially in identification. So
I think that's why it's so important to include that in our statewide reporting, because like you said, Dr. Poland, if someone doesn't have the background or the understanding and they're just given that gifted hat to wear without prior knowledge, they need some help in looking at those population percentages in their division. And I think it would be good if we're able to mine that information out of our reporting.
Taking it one step further, you may have to have an example of different size programs. Agreed. And just show how somebody's going through it and how they would report it. And it could lend itself toward just a scenario, or it could lend itself toward a little training video on it.
I agree.
I definitely see training in the future.
Yeah.
not, or, you know, PD.
Especially the regulations, I believe, do stipulate PD. So we're addressing that in that regards. And it flew by, and it was around teacher PD, but I think it's helpful around division leader professional learning as well.
Yes. And I see, you know, and I think too, when I think of PD, there's also the whole, and we have one of our members on school board is school board education on once we nail this down, you know, how doing PD for school board association to better understand what this annual report is and how it's configured and what it's explaining and telling us.
I agree with what Laura just put in the chat about the capturing the talent pool and things like young scholars, because that's not currently something I think that's captured. Is that correct?
What's that?
Laura had put something in about capturing students who are in a talent pool, something like young scholars that maybe don't have a formal code, but they are getting an intervention.
That's correct. They're not
Right.
formally coded.
Right. And so that's on page 13, I see, of the regs, because that's in with some of our new language that talks about the procedures for the talent development program. So numbers should be recorded for that. There's also probably on that same page where we talk about early identification for kindergarten or first grade. So probably numbers should be recorded for that. And then the third thing that's new is the wording about both whole grade and single subject acceleration. And so it would seem like numbers should be recorded for that, because those are newly listed and I think pretty important.
And that may require some work with those companies that provide our student information system platforms. It might be that we have to set up sections for capturing that. We might have to add codes or add flags for those groups.
Yeah, those are going to be really low numbers, I think, you know, when you're talking about accelerating kids. So I think it's going to be a hard, you know, and, you know, what's a good percentage of the population that should be accelerated if you're looking at percentages? There really isn't. So I'm thinking in some ways that may be something that we don't necessarily have to capture. They have to have a policy and procedure, but I don't know if we need to track that, because I think the numbers are going to be really low and it's going to be, you know, hard to compare, but we can certainly add it on our list to consider. I just think it's going to be a hard item to determine, like, are you doing a good job or not doing a good job, you know, if you've accelerated 10 kids or 1 kid.
What might be valuable about that, and I don't know if everyone has seen this in their current divisions, and especially during this current contextual situation of working under a pandemic, is that we, at least here in Albemarle County, we have had an increased request of subject acceleration because of student work at home. So it would be good information to have, especially when thinking about services moving forward, and how can we harness the current contextual situation of home learning, hybrid learning at, you know, to really make sure that we're serving all students to the best of our ability to reach their potential. That's just
one of the things that someone mentioned, you know, keeping track of data. We use Synergy, and what we noticed was synergy was very limited in what we wanted to track. And I mean, we have we just built in-house custom screens. And so I don't know if, Power School has that flexibility, and I don't know how hard it is to do that. But that was something, because that way you can keep track of like students, in your talent pool by assigning them a code within your system. They wouldn't necessarily get a state code, but at least you can keep track of that. I know that doesn't pertain to really what, the idea of the state report, but I did want to throw that out there because that is an option that, we wanted to keep track of data. So you just have to find a place for it. And there are usually blank fields in those systems that will like user code 5. And you can always, assign like your student that, that was accelerated 1 grade level in a subject or something like that, a certain code if you wanted to track that data. But from my understanding, like I said, I don't know how easy it is to change all of that. And I know Chesterfield's a relatively large division that has, someone that alters that, but just wanted to throw that out there, that if you're interested in tracking that data, you might want to touch base with your tech person to see what custom fields you can put in your system to track that data.
Well, and that's another example where you're used to doing that within your division, and other divisions that are smaller that don't have that institutional memory as to how that would work would help another person move forward.
We do that too, George, that we have different codes for the kids that may not be formally identified according to the state code, but we service like for our differentiated kids that are in 3rd through 5th grade. And so what my chat earlier was talking about is including that somehow, so that, because a lot of those kids are our underrepresented populations that may not quite make the formal identification. Not to say that we don't have our underrepresented identified, but we are serving a whole lot more students than we are necessarily identifying.
In Albemarle County, we refer to them, we don't call them GRTs, we call them talent development resource teachers. And
right.
we have them documenting services through Google Sheets, and it's very laborious. But if we could have it within a SIS system, it would probably ease up on some of that, because they are able to document what differentiated services, what they look like, what, and it varies based on elementary and secondary. And it's valuable to illustrate that, like what Laura said, identification and services sometimes don't align. And sometimes we reach more students through services than we do through identification. And then that brings up the huge question of, so how is identification used and to what ends? Because if it's not an access point for services, then how is it is, because it's used to measure equity and access, but then that's working under the assumption that if one is identified, they're getting it additional services. And on the flip side, if you're not identified, then you are not getting services, which may not be the truth in the different divisions. So my team has been doing a lot of work around documenting this stuff, but finding a much easier way to do it, it would be wonderful.
And I'll be honest with you, that's how things were kind of done to keep track of things, like a whole bunch of Excel spreadsheets. And what happens is, over time, when people like switch roles, that data gets lost, and suddenly we're like, hey, where's the data from 2015? And it's really nice once it was done. It was a year-long work to kind of iron things out, but it's well worth it, because it makes your information system useful. Mm-hmm. And with the tech people, they really enjoy that because they see how the information system sometimes is not used the way it should be.
Okay.
So yeah, absolutely. I would at least explore that a little bit.
Yeah, I might reach out to you, George, just separately to talk about how you did it in your division.
Yeah.
Totally agree. And I did it also. And it was
Yeah,
a couple year process. It was not, and I totally agree with what George said. We lost data before I came on board because it just wasn't in a good usable space.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Kirsten,
So-
can you speak to what you were mentioning?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the things that I was wondering, and I think Donna said it looked like at least the checkoff kind of system will work. But when I was, when we look at what's working in identification, and if we had a place where we could say, hey, this system is doing a really good job, what's their identification system look like, to be able to compare, the results they're getting to the strategies that they're using would be, right now, I go around and look at everybody's local plan and I do like a control F and see like, are they using local norms? Are they using work samples? What's going on there? But if there was an easier place to come and kind of see a check mark of what are the data points you use, are you using local norms or national norms or a combination of norms, that type of a thing would just be helpful to have as kind of a scan to see and compare to the results that are happening.
Well, we already do that whole component on, the program model is part of the annual report, which at some level needs to be revised so that it's a little bit different and people understand it. I mean, I understand it because I know how it's laid out, but I oftentimes get a lot of questions from coordinators who don't have a background in gifted and aren't sure exactly what they're checking off and wind up checking off everything because they have it in their school, but it's not really part of their gifted program. But anyway, I think that part of the annual report will get revised to, and certainly we could include more about identification so that we can collect, how many schools, just even a picture of how many schools identify in GIA, how many identify in SAA.
SAA, yes.
You don't even have that to be able to look at how many divisions do that. But it certainly part of what we could do would be to say, are you using local norms? Check. Or national norms? Check on your nationally normed test measure, which it's kind of interesting, with people who aren't in gifted, they're thinking they're using a nationally normed test that they have to use national norms, but the field has moved to using local norms or even school norms in some cases. But yeah, those are things that we can change as part of the annual report too.
And
Donna,
I
I have a
think
quick question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Question. What about referral data? Are we going to include that as well on this report? Because to evaluate what's happening in identification appropriately, don't you think we should have something about referral data as well to see who's being referred?
I was going to ask the same question, and to make sure that, yeah, you might be referring a diverse group, but you're not actually identifying a diverse group.
Yeah, that's the identification part that we talked about. But yeah, I mean, referral data is certainly going to be there.
And I think also if we are including some type of checkbox with, are you using local norms, that we will likely see a correlation with higher identification of underserved populations with the use of local norms. Yeah. And that may be something that would be the data that some divisions need to push them to use a local norm in their identification process.
Yeah, it certainly will be part of the guidance document. So just kind of to capture, I mean, you've done a great job filling out the outline here. The things that we have to, some things like the talent development program will require a new code. And I had way at the start put that on my list as this is a new code that's got to get collected. while a lot of things are going to be things that we just take the information that's there, and the EIM people will do their magic and, present it to us in a fashion that's usable. This is actually going to be a new code that needs to be collected. And so I'm not quite sure how you move things through our system to get a new code collected, but it's definitely been on my list to collect for the talent development program. And then we'll also look at how that breaks, how that information breaks down.
I think it'll be
In terms
helpful.
of,
The data that came out of the Purdue report was specifically around state regulations regarding how giftedness is identified and labeled, and then they compared to what access points were within each school division. So in Virginia, for instance, we got an A in that, there's a statewide expectation of identification and services, and that there is, their gifted is addressed at each division. But when comparing schools for that were identified as Title I or historically underrepresented populations, we got an F around underrepresented populations participating or the services that say there are not enough diverse students within taking advanced coursework. And so by providing, or at least looking at the service data that happens in between identification, and we'll at least be able to determine a movement so that we can get an A on both sides, so that we can have some movement beyond just one single data point that is regarding identification, which is an easy data point to capture. The services is difficult, but if we created a statewide way of capturing what that looks like in each division, it could be hugely impactful, well beyond Virginia. So
the other thing I was going to say is that report only uses a representation index. Yeah. And I know a couple of years back, this group used the equity allowance formula, and we may fare better using the minimum threshold as well as the representation index, because it's going to give you a different data report. So we might want to take that. You might want to take that into consideration, especially because since we're just starting out with this, we might need to have like the goal is the representation index, but we started out here at the minimum with the equity allowance formula, since this is the first time we're doing this at a state level, to give some growth, show some growth.
And will there be some sort of a PD or discussion group or something offered on how to go about doing that to get more diverse populations in AP courses and things of that nature?
Oh, certainly. I mean, I think once we get these kinds of things nailed down, then we need to go back through it and say, what do we need PD on? And that's where our stakeholder group's also going to help us. I envision a survey at different times during this whole process, a survey of what would be helpful that we've overlooked, of the things we have. Is there something particular you want to provide insights on, or even asking, what would be helpful in terms of PD, that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of PD that we're going to have to do in order to, certainly the guidance documents got to be there to be helpful in the long run, but also we've got to do PD, because I know, the turnover rate, not only are we dealing with 60% people without backgrounds, your turnover rate is somewhere around a quarter of the population of gifted coordinators turnover every year. And it might be that one coordinator goes to a different division, but it's still provide, a new person stepping in. And so, yeah, that's a separate issue, but it has to do with the PD part of it. You can do PD, all out push on the PD once all this comes about, but the follow-up's got to continually be there because of the turnover rate.
Not only the turnover rate, the add-on of that, some people wear multiple hats and smaller school divisions, and that's another point of contention. That's a whole nother, it's hard. It's easier if you're focused. It's hard for us who have other people in our school divisions that are coordinators and instructional specialists. So I can't even fathom a person who is the foreign language person and the gifted coordinator and the whatever trying to do what we do.
Mm-hmm.
The other point I wanted to put on the record is it's one thing to identify students to go into AP classes. There are two other parts of that. Are they ready for those classes, and do they have the skill sets to be successful? And what is the trend? Are they successful? And what can we learn from it? I think that has been a question that's been out there for ages since I started in Gov school experiences.
Right, which is why I was wondering if there was going to be PD on that, because you can't just throw kids into AP classes and, and
so are you talking about like integrating prerequisite skills for those who are coming from a talent development pool? I'm confused.
It would be separate. It would be those students who are we'll say Division A realizes that they're not serving enough students. And so they go back to the teachers and say, well, who do you recommend from 7th grade, 8th grade to go into AP? Mm-hmm. And then that information is put in with the guidance, but then it may get diluted because the types of skills that are needed to be successful in that, we'll say 10th grade world history AP, the student didn't have those prerequisite skills back in their middle school.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize.
Vertical discussions, conversations really help with that, so we were very intentional in who we selected to teach honors classes and AP classes so that, if we identified a student as having the potential, but they'd never had that level of rigor before, we started them in an honors level class, and that teacher was having conversations with the AP teacher, knowing what they were preparing the students for. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That they could be successful in the AP class. And then the AP teacher knew, okay, I'm getting these students that they've only ever had 1 year of honors level coursework, so I need to provide some additional supports, that kind of thing.
So front loading, you're talking about front loading?
Correct. And I think that whole piece I would see as one value add for the coordinators who Donna is talking about that don't have the background and think that they're doing their job by just checking the box and saying, yes, I put 5 more in this year. No, what does that really mean? My other final thought along the same lines of the AP, is there any way, or do you all look at the Virginia 5 Cs and how that aligns with some of those prerequisite skills? Is that something that we should be looking at and merging in with the other idea of deeper learning? Is that a separate little subgroup of this taking AP class?
I think the 5 Cs align with the conceptual frameworks around talent development and domain alignment. So it may not be within this particular process, but it could be a conversation of how are we being very deliberate in working with stakeholders who are outside of gifted specifically, because when you look at the work around talent development, it is about being very deliberate in pathways and the profile of a graduate and so on and so forth. But gifted is not necessarily part of that conversation. And so when we create the when we are looking specifically around at talent development, and if we are going to use that as a code, that might be an entry point to say, so we're having the same conversation, so let's maybe work together, and so that we can make sure that the system is meeting the needs and adapting to do that. I do think it's valuable to collect the attrition rate around advanced coursework, because that's been a conversation, especially for advanced programs and services like magnets or partial magnets. It's been very division or site-based, but I think deliberate collection of that data could inform that if we are losing students, which students are not staying in the advanced coursework, and what strategies could be taken to support them. Like, we can talk about what prerequisites need to happen, but how do we keep the students? I mean, the research is always about, like, how do we identify, but then how do we retain the students so that they stay on the pathway and support them, as opposed to just dropping someone in the middle of the ocean without a floaty. So.
Well, and sometimes it's just as simple as making sure you have a cluster. You know, I'm not going to enter a class if I'm the only one that looks like me. I'm not going to be comfortable, you know, so making sure that you're not just to check that box saying, I'm going to nominate this one student who is, you know, Latino or what have you, and then they're the only one in the class that looks like them. You know, it's making sure they understand, you know, or them saying, well, I nominated and they don't do it, you know, well, that's because it's one person of color versus, you know, or one girl and they're all boys, or, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there are many contextual factors that contribute to underrepresentation. And I mean, we can, if we are very deliberate about addressing the ones that are system driven, then that's at least one part of it. It looks like we're supposed to be wrapping up, but there's so much information that we need to gather. Does everyone have, so I shared with you all this document regarding our planning document. Does everyone have access to it? And so we're going to continue working on this.
Yeah. And I think it's important that we go back. Like, you've captured a lot of stuff, but as we've gone through, I've put page numbers on the regulations, or, you know, not only page numbers, but like item whatever, and item D.1 or something like that. So it's going to be important for us to note specifically where it's required or called out as part of the regulations. And it may not be the exact wording that we use, but because it says they need to keep track of, you know, who's taking advanced level courses, then we need to track who's in the AP courses, who's in the honors courses, you know, how many students are identified identified gifted kids are taking these courses, you know, what percentage, and then based on that, how well are they doing? What's the attrition rate? That kind of thing.
Well, Donna, I think you just described another focus group from this of just
trying to go through. But I think if Melanie shared this document, we can certainly all work on it and put in there, you know, different things that she has listed. I would just put in all my page numbers and item numbers that I have already written down. I can add that to it. So I don't think we need a focus group to do that, but we certainly want to make sure that we document this, because that will be the question that comes back at some point. Why do you need all this stuff in the annual report? Well, this is why, because it's part of the regulations, you know. It's going to be the justification for the EIM people doing the work they're doing. Is, you know, it just can't be willy-nilly because I want it. It's got to be, this is part of the regulations requirement. And maybe, there's something like, they say, well, we just can't add a new code just because you want to add a new code. Well, here's the documentation. It's part of the regulation requirements that we look at talent development. So we need a new code for that.
Well, in our committee work, I've started a Google sheet that kind of took your names, and if you mentioned a page, it's in there now. So we didn't mess up what we have on this working document, but we'll probably merge it all. And when we go back to that lucid chart, it'll be fun.
And hopefully legible.
Yeah.
We're laughing because the thinking document, when we did, it looked a little bit manic. So we didn't want to present ourselves as unstable. So but we can pause this for now and just revisit it. And I think I updated permissions for everyone so that you all can edit it as well. And just, if there are any questions or ideas. I was not able to watch the chat during this, so hopefully we can save that, because there were some really good ideas and questions in that as well. And then so that we can continue this process, because I think it's more than just creating new pie charts. It's about like making it really purposeful. So.
Right. I was trying to, I've saved the chats before, and I was trying to figure out how I did that. Does anybody know that off the top of their head?
In the chat box where it says to, and then all panelists, and then there's a little box that has 3 dots. If you click that, it should say save chat. And then you click on chat. You can click it and it'll say chat saved, show in folder, and it shows up in your Zoom account.
Okay, thank you. Got it.
All right, so I think I've stopped sharing my screen.
And some of your chats were perfect to put into the Google Sheet. So I thank you for that detail. So I think we collected a lot of information today.
Are y'all still there? Okay, because my things keeps popping in and out saying, unstable or whatever. Anyway, I guess we need to move on. George.
Alrighty, so the next thing is the reports from members and representative groups. This is a time that if Sarah wants to explain how she would like this done.
Sure. So I am taking notes for Dorn here. So this is a time where you would share something that is unique or atypical that's going on from your perspective, and you can pass if there's nothing to share. If you do have something to share, I would ask that you would type it and just send a quick email so that the wording is exactly the way you would like it recorded in the minutes. I am happy to start because I would like to share on behalf of the consortium, and that's the group of gifted coordinators from across the state. We, of course, did not have our in-person meeting in September. We did have a webinar. Dr. Poland did something for us earlier in the fall, but we are in the process of planning 2 January webinars. Kirsta Maloney from Fairfax is going to do something for us speaking about talent development and young scholars, which is kind of timely. That should be on every coordinator's radar. So she is doing something for us in January. And then later on, we're going to have a panel of coordinators, just a chance to chat and talk about identification and talk about services and what the second semester of the year is going to look like. So both of those will come out by email and Zoom links. So that's kind of exciting that we're staying in touch, even though we didn't get to meet. Anyone else? Oh, I see.
I'll share real quick, Sarah. I'm Kirsten from Fairfax, for those of you who don't know me. And the reason I was thinking so much about local norms lately is because this has been a big push and effort in our district to get approval from our school board to be able to use them to create our second grade screening pool this year. And they voted last night that we are going to be able to do that this year. So we are in the background, my whole team is trying to get everything, all the numbers run so we can notify our families, but that's a pretty exciting move. We ran a whole bunch of modeling about, it's not an eligibility, it's just to get kids to the table, but it's going to get kids to the table who haven't been getting to the table for consideration. And so we're pretty excited about that and seeing what results we have for our eligibility from that. So happy night last night.
Good.
Sarah, this is Dr. Felicia Lohman Sykes, Washington County, Region 7. And I would like to mention that the Region 7 Consortium of Gifted Education Administrators, we host a yearly Speaking for the Gifted conference. We were not able to do that in June. However, in June of 2021, that conference will be held in an online format this year. So we are still able to provide teachers in our region with high quality professional development, just in a new way.
Felicia, is that for your whole region, for Region 7?
Yes, it's for all teachers, counselors, school administrators in Region 7.
I'll share a quick tidbit that this is George Fold at Chesterfield County. Just real quick, a neat little tidbit of with Maggie Walker Governor's School. I know that the academic year governor schools have been, examined at the state level as far as a lack of diversity. And one of the things that, we've been working as like local regions is finding ways to diversify the students that we select, because it ultimately is the counties that send these students. And, part of this, I participated in the group this summer that met as well. But the cool thing is school divisions that had more than one middle school, we all got together and started collaborating on a way that we could develop instead of a division-wide selection procedure for these programs, but comparing the students by where they live by school attendance zone. Because like with Chesterfield, we have 2 middle schools, or we have 12 middle schools. And that's in a large, in a relatively large county like that, communities are different. And we have a way to take into account those local feeder patterns. The Chesterfield School Board reviewed the plan and endorsed the plan in October. And so this year we are selecting our candidates for Maggie L. Walker Governor's School by first looking at the top candidates in each middle school, and then any leftover spots, it will go to a division level ranking. It acknowledges that when you compare students from a large geographical area, they're not the same. So if you compare them based upon where they go to middle school, you have a greater chance of comparing students who've had similar experiences. So we're really excited about that. It was a really cool collaborative effort in, between the coordinators, in Central Virginia that have multiple middle schools. And it was fun to see that kind of take shape and gain momentum of how we can look at the admissions process even a little bit further and create some more equitable measures for students as well. Thought I'd share that because that's really cool work. It's always fun to get together with your colleagues, and I call it causing trouble, but it's really neat to do that and brainstorm ways to really benefit kids.
For Roanoke City, one thing that has been just fabulous to watch is our gifted resource teachers and how they are serving our kids in this pandemic and virtual world, because we still have kids that are only coming in 2 days a week. It won't be until second semester that at this point it looks like they may be coming back 4 days a week. But so trying to be able to pull out services in our non-center based schools has been just wonderful to see the gifted resource teachers using Canvas. They've pushed out their own course for the students to participate in. It's been very highly participated, which we weren't sure if, because it's kind of optional because the kids are doing other stuff for their general ed classrooms, but it's really been not as bad as we thought. So I'm sure other divisions are doing very similar things, but it's been cool to watch in Roanoke City. And kudos, Kristen, for going for local norms. We've been doing that for a while now, and it has made a huge difference in getting kids to the table, but in addition to identifying those kids.
Laura, I was glad to be able to list your district as some of the examples and when I was looking around. And I will say I also quoted the document from 2017 from this committee about using local norms when I was putting together all my evidence for why we need to do this.
That's awesome. And we do use school norms also. We use school, city, and national, and whatever is going to benefit the student is what we use.
I should clarify, we're using local building norms because the local norms, the district norms don't really help us, but the building norms really were going to help us. So.
And sorry to go off on that, but to because we do have, like George is saying, we've got 12 or 17 different elementary schools that for some schools, the city norm will help more than their building norms, compared to some that the building norms help more than the city or the national.
Anything else? Carla, were you going to pass? Then that's everybody, George.
I'm on mute. Public comments. Let's see.
I just checked my email a few minutes ago, but let me just check again. But so far I have not received anybody's public comment that they would like for me to read.
All right, so no public comments. And the next item on our agenda is adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting for today?
So move.
And is there a second?
Who?
Oh, Cheryl.
Cheryl.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And who's the second?
Second.
We got Carla second in the motion. We can do that with this one probably verbally without typing in the chat. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great.
Aye.
Then we are adjourned.
Yes.
Thank you all so much for your work today and the great discussion that we had.
Yes.
And
Happy
we will meet
Hanukkah.
again in February.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
February 5th.
Happy holidays. Happy Hanukkah. Happy Merry Christmas.
Your hair looks great, Donna.
Oh, it's starting to come back in.
Yeah, it takes a while. Mine's not getting very long, but it's just glad to have it, huh?
Yeah.
See ya.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Hey, kitty man. Hey, kitty man. What you just laying down there for? It'd be very warm.